Shabbat Shalom. I actually was going to give a different sermon today. The idea had been percolating in my head for a while, and I even had a cool title in mind, but you'll have to wait for that, because earlier this week I started working on my Torah readings for today. I happened to be scheduled for a double header, doing some of the same readings at the 7:30 service as at the 9:15 service. Now, I mention this not so you'll marvel at how devoted to Bethel I am, but if you must, feel free. So one pair of verses at the beginning of the 6th Aliyah particularly caught my eye. And to use one of the more annoying cliches of our time, it was as if the universe was trying to tell me something. What a silly notion, the universe trying to tell me something. No, it was basher. I had to speak about Deuteronomy 12:20-21. So I will. To frame our exploration, I'll first pose a question. Does Judaism demand that we are vegetarians? Let's take a look at these two verses, the two verses that caught my eye at the beginning of the 6th Aliyah. You can find them at the beginning on page 1066. They begin on page 1066. Verse 20. Ki yarchiv Adonai Elohecha et gevulcha kasher diber lach. When Adonai your God has enlarged your borders as God promised you, v'amarta ochla vasar, and you say, I will eat meat. Ki ta'aven nafshecha lechol basar, because your soul desires to eat meat. B'chol avat nafshecha tochal basar. Then, as your soul desires, you may eat meat. So maybe this is the end of the discussion. Are we allowed to eat meat? The Torah's answer appears clear. Yes, we are. So this might be one of the shortest sermons you ever heard. Shabbat Shalom. Wait a minute. But wait, there's more. Verse 21. Ki yirchak mimcha hamakom, when you're far away from the place, asher yivchar Adonai Elohecha lasum shemot sham, which Adonai your God has chosen to establish God's name, v'zavachta mi bekarcha umitzonecha asher natan Adonai lecha, then you may slaughter animals from your herd and your flock, which Adonai has given you, in the asher tziviticha, in the way that I have commanded you, v'achalta bish'arecha, and you may eat within your gates, bechol avat nafshecha, as your soul desires. So this verse appears to be amplifying what the previous verse said. Yes, you may eat meat, bechol avat nafshecha, as your soul desires, you may eat meat. But of course, it's not that simple. So let's take a little journey through biblical and rabbinic texts and see what we find. So first things first. If Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 20 and 21 seem to be saying, at least at first glance, yes, we are permitted to eat meat. Question is, were we always permitted to eat meat? And the answer is no, we were not. At least Adam, the first human being, was expected to be a vegetarian. You may want to take a look at Genesis chapter 1, verses 21 to 30, which you can find beginning on page 10. So keep one finger on 1066 and another finger perhaps on page 10, or I'll read the verses for you. Vayomer Elohim, God said, this is God speaking to Adam in the Garden of Eden. Hinei natati lachem et kol esev zorea zera. Behold, I have given you every seed-bearing plant, asher al penei chol haaretz, which is upon the face of the earth. The et kol eitz asher bo pri eitz zorea zara, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit, lachem yihyeh le'ochla. It shall be for food, to you for food. Verse 30, Ulchol chayat haaretz ulchol of hashamayim, and to all the animals on land and to all the birds of the sky, ulchol romes al haaretz asher bo nefesh chaya, and to everything that creeps on the earth in which there is the breath of life, et kol yerek esev le'ochla vahichein. I give all the green plants for food, and it was so. So here too, the text seems clear. God tells Adam that God had created all of these fruits and vegetables for food, and that God has provided this food for human beings and for all of the animals as well. Yes, I know that some members of the animal kingdom are carnivores, but this is not biology, this is theology. So stick with me. So Adam is told, you may eat fruits and vegetables. But Adam is not told, I created these animals for you to eat. Just, I've created fruits and vegetables for food. On the other hand, look at what God subsequently says to Noah in Genesis chapter 9. This is verses 3 to 4, beginning on page 50, if you have enough fingers to get you there. Kol remes asher hu chai, every moving thing that lives, lachem yihiyeh lo'ochla, you may eat them. Ki yerek esev natati lachem et kol. Like the green herbs, I have given you all. Ach basar benafsho damo lo tochelu. But the meat with its life in it, which is its blood, you shall not eat. So, what do we have so far? Adam is told, here are the fruits and vegetables that I created for you to eat, and Noah is told, you may eat meat. Now that leads some commentators to conclude that in the perfect world of the Garden of Eden, people were permitted to eat only fruits and vegetables, while in the imperfect world after Noah and the flood, people were permitted to eat meat. The Talmud underscores this point, and it's clear to the rabbis that Adam was expected to be a vegetarian, while Noah and the rest of us, Noah's descendants, are not required to be vegetarians. End of discussion for some Jews. But for other Jews, the presentation of vegetarianism in the ideal world serves as a presentation of the ideal of vegetarianism. Judaism might not require us to be vegetarians, but perhaps it is trying to push us in that direction. And many Jewish vegetarians today do feel that at least part of their commitment to vegetarianism is influenced by this classical Jewish encouragement of vegetarianism. But wait, there's still more. So let's return to the verses in our parsha, specifically to the second of the two, verse 21. Remember all that talk about being far from the place, ki yirchak mimcha hamakom? What place is the Torah talking about? The Torah here is talking about the place of sacrifices, the Mishkan, the portable sanctuary built by the Israelites in Moses' time, which eventually will be replaced by the temple in Jerusalem. But Leviticus 17, verses 3 to 4, which is on page 685, if you have enough fingers, Leviticus 17 tells us that we may not slaughter and consume livestock independently. We may eat only sacrificial meat. Sacrificial meat, what's that? Well, remember that the religion of Israel, that which eventually evolved into what we call Judaism, emerged in a world of sacrifices. Ancient Near Eastern pagans made offerings to their gods, and the Israelites similarly made offerings of agricultural products and livestock to our God. This passage from Leviticus discusses a particular offering known as a zevach shlamim, a peace offering. Here's the procedure. An animal would be dedicated as a sacrifice. The Kohen, the priest, would slaughter the animal according to a specific procedure. Part of the animal would be burnt on the altar, burnt to smoke and ash, metaphorically consumed by God. Parts of the animal would go to the Kohanim as their portion. That's one of the ways that the community supported the Levitical priests. And the remainder of the animal could be eaten by the individual who had brought the offering and by his family. So God metaphorically consumes God's part, the Kohanim consume their parts, and the individual or the family bringing the offering consumes their parts. And the symbolism, at least to me, is clear: sharing a meal with God. How do we connect with other human beings? By sharing food, by going out for coffee or inviting someone to our home for dinner or what have you. We connect with other people by eating together, and that's the way we connect with God, at least in ancient Judaism. And it's no coincidence, by the way, that the biblical word, or one of the biblical words for biblical sacrifices is korban, which is related to karov, which means close. The korbanot were our way of trying to achieve closeness, spiritual intimacy with God. And so this symbolic sharing meals with God was part of that process. But according to that passage in Leviticus, we were allowed to eat meat only when it was part of such a sacrificial meal. Secular slaughter of animals was strictly forbidden. But now we return to those verses in our Torah portion where there is a broadening of the permission to eat meat. In Leviticus, we're permitted to eat meat only in conjunction with a sacrificial meal. In Deuteronomy, we're permitted to eat meat, even not related to sacrificial rituals. Now, surely there was a practical reason for this loosening of the restriction. When the Israelites were wandering together in the desert, it was easier to limit meat eating to those rituals. But once the Israelites are established in the Holy Land, spread throughout the land, it will be more burdensome to maintain this restriction. Eventually, the sacrificial system will be centralized in Jerusalem, and King Solomon will build the Beit HaMikdash, the temple in Jerusalem. So this easing of the restrictions has a practical benefit. But I think there's something else going on here. First, God was more restrictive, and then God was less restrictive. First, God said you can eat meat under only these circumstances, and then God said you can eat meat under broader circumstances as well. Now think of that dynamic, saying no, and then later saying yes. Think of that dynamic while I reread from verse 20 in a tone of voice that might sound familiar to anyone who has raised children or anyone who has been raised by people who raise children. V'amarta ochla basar, and you say, I will eat meat, ki ta'aveh nafshecha lechol basar, because your soul desires to eat meat, fine. B'chol avat nafshecha tochal basar. Then as your soul desires, you may eat meat. Okay, fine. You want it that badly? Go ahead, as your soul desires. You know, sometimes our kids wear us down. You want to go to Barnes & Noble at midnight on a school night, just this one time, you promise, so you can be one of the first people to pick up your pre-ordered copy of the latest Harry Potter book on a school night? Fine. You want it so badly, b'chol avat nafshecha, as your soul desires. Geh gesundheit. You can go and pick up the book. And I can almost hear God's sarcasm, God's annoyance in this grudging permission of secular slaughter and meat eating. Go ahead. If you want it that badly, go ahead. I'm not going to forbid it, but don't think it's perfectly all right, because it's not. It's not perfectly all right. So what else is going on here? God isn't speaking only to our ancestors with the loosening of restrictions on meat eating. God is speaking to us as well. Those of us who are Jewish vegetarians and those of us who are Jews but not vegetarians. And God is speaking to us because our mitzvot, our laws and rules, are also statements of values. They're not simply a question of permitted or not permitted, required or not permitted, or not required. Our rules make statements of values. And our obligation is to be sensitive to and to cultivate sensitivity to these statements of values. Perhaps this grudging permission is here to challenge us to confront the moral ambiguity of eating meat. It's not forbidden by Torah law, but it's not perfectly all right. And if I'm going to choose to eat meat, I must be reminded of that moral ambiguity. But remember that Judaism doesn't require vegetarianism. Judaism does not forbid us to eat meat. And Judaism is not bashful about telling us no. In the area of food alone, Judaism tells us that certain foods are forbidden to us always. Other foods are permitted to us, but forbidden to be consumed together with certain other foods. And certain foods were forbidden to eat during Pesach, and other foods we avoid during that period of semi-mourning preceding Tisha B'Av. Judaism is not bashful about saying no, and it doesn't forbid us to eat meat. As a matter of fact, there are some classical sources that encourage the eating of meat. On Shabbat, for example, during which the Talmud tells us eating meat and drinking wine help us to fulfill the obligation, v'karata l'Shabbat oneg. You shall call the Sabbath a delight. On the other hand, yes, Tevye, there are lots of other hands here. I want to share a story about Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. So many of us know a lot about Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. He was the chief rabbi of the Jewish community at the beginning of the 3rd century. He edited the Mishnah and had it committed to writing. He is one of the most important figures in all of rabbinic history. And when the Talmud refers to him simply as rabbi, nobody has to ask which rabbi they're talking about. One of the most illustrious, one of the most important rabbis of all time. And despite his illustrious life, he suffered from terrible medical maladies in his later years, including painful and debilitating gastrointestinal symptoms. There's a beautifully poignant Talmudic story about Rabbi's deathbed vigil, in which the angels are praying for his ascent to heaven, while his students are praying for his recovery. The angels want him in heaven, his students want him here in the world. And when his devoted housekeeper sees how much he is suffering, she changes her prayer and prays that he will be relieved of his suffering. But why did Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi suffer so much? Here's an explanation from the Talmud. Dahahu egla dahavu ka mimato le lishchita. A calf was being taken to slaughter. Azal. It ran away. It broke away to la ya l'reishe bechanfei de Rabbi, and it hid its head under Rabbi's clothes. V'chabechi, and it started to cry. This frightened animal who's about to be slaughtered is crying in fear. So what does Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi say? Amar le, he said to the calf, Zil, l'chach notzarta, go, for this you were created. I mean, it's almost as if Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi said, hey, we're having veal chops tonight. Don't go too far. You're the veal chops. Amrei, so in heaven they said, Ho'il v'la kamarachem, since he has no pity, since he has no rachmanas, litu alei yisurin, let us bring suffering upon him. Now, putting the difficult theology of this on the side, it's a very sad little story. And the tragic lesson for Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi is that sensitivity to living things is important. So I am not a vegetarian, but like many of you, I eat far less meat today than I did when I was younger. When many of us were children, meat was a more prominent part of what was considered a healthy American diet. But I eat less meat today because we know more about the health hazards associated with red meat in particular. I also eat less meat today because it's expensive. I also eat less meat today because I'm aware of, and I hope sensitive to, the natural resources considerations related to meat consumption and production, including pollution considerations and the amount of feed required to raise cattle for beef. So another reason that I eat less meat than I did in earlier chapters of my life. But primarily, I eat less meat than I used to because it's not perfectly all right. Judaism tries to sensitize us to all living things. And so it regulates our relationships with our fellow human beings. It regulates our relationships with animals in this area, in the area of food and other areas. It regulates our relationship with plant life as well. Bal tashchit, the biblical prohibition of wastefulness and extravagance, is an important mitzvah. A mitzvah which begins with the prohibition of unnecessarily destroying trees. So, Judaism does not require me to be a vegetarian, but I still struggle with the moral ambiguity of eating meat. And Judaism offers an ethical compromise between vegetarianism on one hand and unthinking, unfeeling meat eating on the other hand. We live in a world of many ethical gray areas, and Judaism challenges us to confront this particular gray area, and perhaps as a result, many others as well. But still, I continue to struggle with it all, and maybe that's the point. And so Judaism offers us not only that ethical compromise regarding vegetarianism, but an experiential context in which to face these issues, to make us confront the moral ambiguity of eating meat, to remind us of the lives that are taken in order for us to sustain our lives, to sensitize us to all life in the miraculous world in which we live, and to help us continue to find our place in God's world. Shabbat Shalom.